There is a specific kind of loneliness that doesn't get talked about enough. Not the loneliness of actually being alone, the loneliness of being with someone you love, someone who is right there, and still feeling fundamentally unknown. They miss the moment that mattered. They don't notice the thing that always gets to you. And you think, after all this time, how do you still not know this about me? This is an Encore episode, and I chose to bring it back because I think it names something that a lot of people are struggling with. If you've ever felt unseen in a relationship with someone who genuinely loves you, this one is going to reframe that in a way that I hope actually sticks. Before we get into it, I'd love to hear from you. I've put a link in the show notes where you can tell me what you'd like me to cover in future episodes. This show exists because you keep showing up, and I want to make sure you're getting what you actually need to feel supported. The link is in the show notes. Okay, let's get into it. There is a specific kind of loneliness that doesn't get talked about enough. It's not the loneliness of being alone. It's the loneliness of being with someone you chose, someone you love, someone who is right there and still feeling fundamentally unknown. They order for you and get it wrong. They don't notice the thing that always gets to you. They miss the moment that mattered. And you think, how, after all this time, how do you still not know this about me? That feeling has a name. It's not just frustration. It's the particular grief of a person who has been waiting to be seen by someone who doesn't have the full picture. And today, I want to talk about how that gap got there, because the answer might be harder than you're expecting, and also more hopeful. You're listening to Coupled With, the podcast that helps you take the guesswork out of feeling seen, heard, and valued in your relationship. If you've ever felt stuck in the same arguments, struggled to stay connected, or wondered how to better communicate with your partner, you're in the right place. I'm Dr. Rachel Orlick, a couples therapist and coach, and together, we're going to make relationships make sense. Let's dive in. Welcome to Coupled With. Today we're talking about what we bring into relationships, what we leave out, and what happens when the parts we left out start demanding to be seen. Here's what I mean. The story most people tell themselves at this point is, my partner doesn't know me because they're not paying attention, because they don't care enough to learn, because I am somehow not worth the effort of being truly understood. I want to offer you a different story. One that is more uncomfortable in some ways and considerably more useful. Think back to the beginning. There was a version of early relationship that most of us know well. The electricity of it, the way everything about that person felt interesting and specific and worth knowing. The texts you reread, the conversations that went too long, the feeling of being seen early in a way that felt almost unbearable in its goodness. And underneath all of that, quietly, almost invisibly, the editing. Not lying, not performing, just curating. Laughing off the thing that actually stung. Not mentioning the need that felt too big too soon. Letting the thing slide that you'd normally push back on. Because this was new and fragile and you didn't want to be the person who made it complicated. Showing the version of yourself that felt most likely to be chosen. And it felt okay. It genuinely felt okay for a while. Because early relationship does something neurologically real. The dopamine, the novelty, the intensity of new attachment. It creates a kind of buffer. The incompatibilities are visible, but not yet costly. The unmet needs are present, but not yet urgent. Everything that would matter later feels manageable now. You tell yourself you'll bring it up eventually, when things are more settled, or when it feels safer, or when you know that they can hold it. And then things get more settled, and the buffer fades, and the needs that were always there, that were never manufactured, never unreasonable, never too much, stop feeling optional. They surface, and they surface into a relationship that was built without them. So now you're in a year or two or maybe longer, and you look at this person you chose, this person who's trying, this person who loves you in the ways they know how, and you feel a specific disorienting anger. You don't know me. After everything, you still don't know me. The honeymoon phase gets a lot of credit for being romantic. Less discussed is the phase in which you successfully presented a carefully managed version of yourself and hoped no one would notice the rest. And congratulations, the bill has arrived. Here's what I want to say before anything else. The editing, it made sense. The nervous system in early relationship is running a calculation it learned long before this relationship existed. Show enough to connect, hide enough to stay safe. That calculation wasn't invented by you. It was handed to you by every relationship that came before this one, including the earliest ones. The parts of yourself you didn't bring in fully, the needs that felt too risky, the tender spots you kept to yourself, the version of you weren't sure could be held, you protected those for a reason. That is not something to be ashamed of. And the dopamine didn't create false needs. It created a temporary tolerance for unmet ones. The needs were always real. They were always yours. The high just made it feel sustainable to wait. When it settled, the needs didn't appear for the first time. They resurfaced, patient and quiet. And now, finally, unwilling to be managed any longer. So here's the part that requires some honesty. Your partner is not a stranger because they weren't paying attention. They are a stranger to parts of you because those parts were never fully brought into the room. The gap you are angry about, the feeling of being unseen, unknown, and chronically missed, did not appear because they failed to find you. It appeared because you were, in some meaningful ways, not fully findable. That is not to blame. It is just a more accurate map. And a more accurate map is the only thing that actually points somewhere. Here's what the blame story cannot do. It cannot close the gap. You can be entirely right that your partner should know you better by now and still be no closer to being known. Rightness in this particular situation is not the same as relief. The nervous system that learned something to edit in early relationship was responding to something real. Not always something this partner did, often something that was established long before they were even in the picture. The person who grew up learning that certain needs were too much, that certain parts of themselves were less lovable, that showing up fully was a gamble that didn't always pay off, that person didn't walk into a new relationship with a clean slate. They walked in with a very well-practiced set of rules about what is safe to bring and what should stay hidden. That is attachment logic. It's not manipulation. It is self-protection from a system that learned at some point the whole self carried risk. And now, years into the relationship, two things are happening simultaneously that are making everything harder. The anger is communicating that something is missing, but it's communicating it in a way that doesn't tell the partner what that something is. They receive the frustration, they receive the withdrawal, they receive the sense that they are failing somehow, but they don't receive the actual information because the actual information, the need, the tender spot, the part that was never fully shared, is still being managed. The anger arrived before the honesty did. And the partner, who fell in love with the edited version, who has been trying to love that version well, is now receiving frustration for reasons they can't fully trace. They are not a villain. They are someone working with an incomplete map and being held responsible for not knowing the territory. That is genuinely not fair to them. And I see this in couples who have been together for 2 years and couples who have been together for 40 years. Naming this dilemma is not the same thing as letting yourself off the hook for what you're feeling. Both things are true. The shame underneath the anger usually sounds something like, I have been here for years and I am still not known. What does that say about how much I matter? And underneath that, even quieter, if I show more of myself now and they still don't get it, what does that mean? That is the actual fear, not that the partner is inattentive, that the rest of you, the unedited version, might not be any more lovable than the edited one was. The relationship isn't broken. It's been running on an earlier version of you, and earlier versions, however carefully constructed, were never meant to be the final one. If you keep having the same fight with your partner, I don't think your problem is communication. I think there's a pattern underneath your relationship that's keeping both of you stuck, and most people never actually learn how to see it. That's why I created my free 7-day relationship challenge. Over 7 days, I'll walk you through why the cycle keeps repeating, what's actually driving it beneath the surface, and how to recognize it in your own relationship. You'll discover why you're probably not fighting each other. You're fighting two activated relational alarm systems. And this isn't just more information. Every day ends with one simple practice that takes just a couple of minutes. Because relationships don't change through insight alone. They change when you practice something different. By the end of the week, you'll understand your relationship in a completely different way. And once you see the cycle, you can't unsee it. If you're ready to stop having the same fight over and over again, join the free 7-day relationship challenge at the link in the show notes. So, the gap exists because the full picture was never available. That's not a comfortable thing to sit with, but it changes what closing the gap actually requires. And that matters, because there are really only two directions from here. The first is the one that's already familiar. The anger and the resentment stays in charge. You continue to signal through frustration or silence or low-grade withdrawal of someone who has stopped expecting to be met that something is wrong. Your partner continues to miss because they are still working without the information they need. The gap doesn't close. The resentment deepens, and eventually the story becomes, they never really knew me, which is true, and which leaves out the part where they were never really fully shown. The second direction is harder and less satisfying in the short term. It requires doing the thing that the nervous system specifically learned not to do, bringing the unedited parts back into the room. Not in a single conversation that arrives as an accusation, not leading with everything that has gone unmet and unnamed for the past 2 years, but incrementally and honestly, and before the need has grown so large that the only way it can come out is sideways. This is not about being more accommodating. It is not about making yourself smaller or easier or more palatable. It's actually the opposite of that. It is the decision to take up the full amount of space you actually require and to stop waiting for your partner to find you in the places you haven't shown them yet. The version of this relationship that becomes possible when the whole self is in the room is not a relationship either of you has yet. That is not a small thing to consider because the fear is real. Will your partner accept this part of you? What I'd like to ask you to do is not comfortable. It's getting curious about your anger. Not to talk yourself out of it, the anger is telling you something real. But under the anger, there is usually a more specific and more vulnerable thing, a need that has been unmet for a long time, a part of yourself that has been waiting to be seen, a tender spot that keeps getting hit, in part because the person hitting it doesn't know it's there. Ask yourself, has this need ever been clearly named? Not implied, not expressed through frustration after the fact, not signaled through withdrawal and hoped that someone would come looking, actually named directly, specifically, before the moment of impact to this specific person in your life. For a lot of people, the answer is no. The need was felt, the absence of its being met was felt, but the need itself was never brought into the room clearly enough for the partner to actually do something with it. Or it was brought in a way that they had to put their defenses up. And I want to be clear, this is not entirely your fault. The nervous system that learned to edit learned to do it for real reasons. But at some point, and this is the part that requires owning, the editing stopped being protection and started being a way of keeping the distance while also resenting it, of staying safe from rejection while also being angry that no one is close enough to really know you. You can't have both. You can't stay hidden and feel fully known. Those two things are incompatible, and no amount of your partner paying better attention is going to close the gap that exists because part of you just isn't in the room yet. The shift is not a technique. It's a decision to bring the unedited version slowly and imperfectly into the relationship you actually have. And to notice when that anger arises, whether the thing you're angry about was ever really given a chance to be different. Being fully known by another person is one of the most significant experiences available in a human life. It begins somewhat inconveniently with letting them see you and being vulnerable with them. So the anger makes sense. Sitting inside a relationship where you feel unknown, where the person is supposed to see you most clearly and keeps missing you, is exhausting in a way that's hard to explain to somebody who has never felt it. It makes sense that it eventually comes out as frustration. It makes sense that the showing up starts to feel pointless when nothing seems to land the way you need it to. But underneath, the anger is someone who still wants to be known by this person, who chose them, who is still here, who hasn't left, even when the gap felt like it might be permanent. That is not nothing. That is actually the most important thing in the room right now. The partner who doesn't fully know you is not someone who failed to love you well enough. They are someone who fell in love with the version of you that felt safe to show, and who has been trying with incomplete information to keep doing that. They deserve the rest of the picture, not because you owe them a fuller disclosure, but because you deserve to be in a relationship where the whole you is what's being loved. That version of the relationship, the one where the edited parts are back in the room, where the needs are named before they become wounds, where you are actually findable to the person looking for you, is not something that arrives on its own. It is built slowly and imperfectly by two people who are willing to keep showing up with more of the truth than felt comfortable the last time. The nervous system that learned to edit didn't do it alone. And unlearning it, really unlearning it, not just understanding it intellectually, usually doesn't happen alone either. That's not a limitation. That's just how the work actually goes. You have never been in a relationship with someone who knows the whole you. That's not a tragedy. It's an invitation to do something different. If you're tired of having the same fight over and over again, don't just listen to this episode and move on. Take the next step. Join my free 7-day relationship challenge and start seeing the pattern underneath your relationship. Because once you see the cycle, you can't unsee it. Click the link in the show notes and start your free 7-day relationship challenge today. That's it for today's episode of Coupled With. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to hit subscribe so you never miss what's next. And if you found it helpful, please share it with a friend or leave a quick rating and review. It really helps more than you know. And if you're curious about how we might work together or want more resources to strengthen your relationship, head over to my website, www.drrachelorlick.com. You'll find free tools, podcast extras, and ways to go deeper. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.